I want to stand by issues that I raised when the motion was first moved on the 20th of January.
In the meantime, First Deputy Speaker to take the chair.
Mr. Speaker, we will recall that when the motion was moved and seconded, and in doing so, I mentioned that there are various fees that are paid at the university. We have the academic facility user fees, residential facilities, and other charges that include fees charged by the student unions and other things. Mr. Speaker, I know and believe very strongly that this House approved various sums of money for government under the COVID-19 funding measures. And I believe also that there is enough money available for this. So it shouldn't be difficult for government to make money available for support to the public institutions, especially the tertiary ones and the private universities in this country. We know very well that COVID-19 affected all businesses in this country, whether farming, trading, or whatever. And there is the need for this government or the government of Ghana to alleviate the sufferings of Ghanaians. And the availability of this fund can be used judiciously to support them. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge the House that we should look at this request passionately and then make sure that we request government to come to the aid of Ghanaians in these difficult times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, the motion moved and seconded. It's now for the consideration of the House. As I mentioned earlier on, I have the guide from the leaders of the various parliamentary groups, and from the majority side, we have Honorable Kojo Opong Nkrumah. If you are present, please, may you make your contributions now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to the motion that is currently before the House. Mr. Speaker, I want to start by commending my colleague, the Honorable Member of Parliament for Boku Central, for the initial motion and even this materially different version that he's put before the House. And I commend him because, in my view, it amounts to an admission that, contrary to some of the initial views and criticisms expressed of the President's action to provide relief for various segments of the Ghanaian population on the onset of COVID-19, indeed, it's actually a good thing. Mr. Speaker, if I may refresh colleagues' memories, we would recall that His Excellency the President, as part of his interventions, caused government, central government, to pay the water bills of Ghanaians from April 2020 and now through to March 2021. On electricity, for example, His Excellency the President caused central government to pay bills for lifeline consumers from April to December 2020, and now that's been further extended to March 2021. For other categories, government was also paying 50% using March bills of 2020 as a benchmark. Mr. Speaker, not only that, for health workers, His Excellency the President extended a hand. Insurance packages, 50% of their basic salary per month as an additional allowance for those who are frontline health workers, even waiving taxes for health workers, and as has been mentioned by my colleagues, providing a stimulus package for businesses. Unfortunately, at the time, Mr. Speaker, these interventions by the President were described as populist. I want to draw the House's attention, for example, to some of these comments as reported in the newspapers and online portals. For example, GhanaWeb 15th August 2020, which says what you should do is to create jobs for Ghanaians so that they have the purchasing power to afford goods and services rather than throwing at them freebies. And this was articulated by His Excellency the former President John Dramani Mahama. Mr. Speaker, at various times, some of our colleagues on the other side questioned how free water and electricity would not have long-term consequences on the Ghanaian economy. My good friend from Yape Kushogu on the other side, the Honorable John Jinapo on Peace FM on the 10th of April 2020, made an argument that by spending more time or more resources on electricity cuts, on supporting electricity and spending more money in that area, the Ghanaian consumer in the end was going to be worse off. Mr. Speaker, so it comes as a relief that having gone around the curve, our colleagues on the other side are the ones who are now proposing that indeed reliefs are a good thing. They are not freebies, they are not populist, but they will help some category of Ghanaians. Right, Honorable Speaker, there's also perhaps a preliminary matter I'll deal with before I substantively deal with whether or not I'll support this motion. It is on the question of whether or not the House can make a request of the President by resolution. And I take that from the comments of the mover of this new motion and our good friend who supported it. Ordinarily, a resolution, in accordance with the definitions of Eskin May, I think page 424, second paragraph, is the opinion or the purposes of the House. Can the House of the people not make a request of the President to do anything? I believe the House can. Now, Mr. Speaker, the mover of the motion in his submission says that his intent is only to bring it to the attention of the President so that he may sit with the education policy makers, if I heard him correctly, and implementers and decide what is appropriate to do. Mr. Speaker, with the greatest of respect to my colleague, that sounds to me like something that is best articulated by a statement, because then a request, and if you examine how a request is treated alongside orders, etc., a request goes beyond simply bringing it to the attention of His Excellency the President that he and the education policy makers and implementers may implement. So, Mr. Speaker, while I agree that, yes, reliefs are a good thing, it is a good thing that our colleagues on the other side are joining us that reliefs should be provided to various categories of Ghanaians. And while I am of the view that perhaps a statement can achieve this purpose, not a request of the President, I also agree that Parliament can make a request of the President. But, Mr. Speaker, a request of the President, in my humble opinion, must meet some standards. If this House is to ferry a request to the President, it must meet some standards. In my mind, Mr. Speaker, first, it must be clear and specific, not ambiguous. Second, it must not encourage an illegality or an unconstitutionality. Third, Mr. Speaker, it must not be discriminatory. And finally, Mr. Speaker, it must follow best practices. And with your latitude, I'd like to provide a few reasons for which, Mr. Speaker, I will not be able to support this motion as is presently worded. The principle sounds like a good idea, but this motion as is presently worded, Mr. Speaker, myself and I believe a good number of my colleagues on this side will not be able to support it. So first, Mr. Speaker, on the question of specificity, what fees are we referring to? The argument has been made over and over again that there are admission fees, there are academic facility user fees, there are fees or some dues that are paid that go to the SRC, etc. Indeed, in his submissions this morning or this afternoon, he distinguishes between full fee-paying students and those who don't pay fees as well. So what fees are we specifically talking about? Are we talking about all the fees or some specific fees? Are we talking even of the residential facility user fees that used to be in existence some time past? Mr. Speaker, there's the need to be clear, because to make such a request of the President, we cannot be ambiguous in our language going to His Excellency the President. Mr. Speaker, another test which I believe this motion as is currently worded does not meet is a test of legality or even constitutionality. Mr. Speaker, you would notice that the new rendition of the motion now talks about absorb. The earlier rendition was about suspend. What I was going to ask was that what did suspend mean in that rendition? Was it to hold back and bring it back a few years down the line, in which case the same people who can pay today will end up paying double? But today it's been amended to absorb. But Mr. Speaker, what does absorb mean? Does it mean central government to pay? And Mr. Speaker, you would notice from some of the earlier arguments that have been made, indeed the second of the motion premises his secondment on the fact that this House has voted monies for COVID-19, and therefore those monies can be applied for this purpose. Mr. Speaker, if I recall, all the monies that this House voted for COVID-19 were for specific purposes which we debated and voted on. So to come back to this House and say that because we voted some monies for COVID-19 interventions, it therefore should be applied or covers everything, Mr. Speaker, is a bit, if I may use the language respectfully, taking the latitude a bit too wide. Mr. Speaker, Article 108 of the Constitution says, Parliament shall not Parliament may not, Parliament shall not, unless the bill is introduced or the motion is introduced, or on behalf of the President, proceed upon a bill, including an amendment to a bill that, in the opinion of the person presiding, makes provision for any of the following: imposition of taxation. And if you read 108 AII, it says the imposition of a charge on the consolidated fund or other public funds of Ghana, or the alteration of any such charge otherwise than by a reduction. Mr. Speaker, Parliament in our Constitution is estopped through the use of a strong word, shall, is estopped from doing an act, in this case in the form of a bill, entertaining a bill, which amounts to an imposition of a charge on the consolidated fund or other funds. So, Mr. Speaker, if we say we want to recommend to the President to absorb, and absorb, as I understand it to be argued, means to use funds from where? The consolidated fund or somewhere else to pay. How does this sit with a constitutional provision like this? Mr. Speaker, again, in the Constitution, Article 17 speaks against discrimination. Speaks against discrimination, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you observe the way this motion is now framed, it talks about paying the fees, talks about absorbing the fees of students in public tertiary institutions. And then when it comes to those in private universities, it says to extend support to accredited private universities. Mr. Speaker, first of all, my argument of specificity applies to this support. What sort of support are we talking about? But even more specifically, now on the matter of discrimination. Why is it that when it comes to public universities, assuming we know what fees we are talking about, why are we not saying that those same fees be paid for those in the private universities? And then for them, we are saying that we should extend support to the institution. And the mover of the motion argues that it is his hope that when that support is extended, they will reduce fees. Mr. Speaker, we cannot work with such a hope. Respectfully, we cannot work with such a hope. It amounts to discrimination if you say you will pay some fees or all fees or specific fees for those in the public universities, and then when it comes to those in the private universities, you don't do same. And you say it should be a matter of support to those institutions. So, Mr. Speaker, that in my humble view will even fly in the face of Article 17 of our Constitution. Mr. Speaker, I want to draw my colleagues' attention to the Public Financial Management Act, Section 33. And Section 33 talks about multi-year expenditure commitments. If I'm correct, Mr. Speaker, our colleagues in the universities attend these institutions spanning more than 1 year. Are we, by this resolution, committing or asking the government to commit to a multi-year commitment? And have we purported in any way to fulfill the obligations of Section 33, where even when a Minister of State is going to do something that goes for multi-year commitment, he needs the express prior written approval of the Minister responsible for finance? We don't even have a Minister for Finance currently. We only have the President's representative at the Ministry responsible for finance. We have not procured Section 33 approval. How will such a resolution, if we pass it, sit with Section 33? Mr. Speaker, very quickly, I want to go to Section 100, again, of the Public Financial Management Act. Any legislation to be laid before Parliament or proposal submitted for the approval of Parliament shall, not may, shall be accompanied by a fiscal impact analysis stating the estimated effect on revenues and expenditures for the financial year in which the legislation or proposal is expected to come into effect. Mr. Speaker, the spirit is to ensure that we don't throw our finances out of balance. What is the fiscal impact presumption or projection that is associated with this resolution that we want to send to the President? My uneducated calculation, about 500,000 young people are across our tertiary institutions in this country, public and private. If the average fee, and we are not even sure which fee we are talking about, is 3,500 cedis, that's 1.7 billion Ghana cedis, about 0.5% of GDP. Am I correct? Am I wrong? How does this sit with the government's numbers? What is the fiscal impact analysis that ought to have been or has been done? Mr. Speaker, again, that test is not met with this motion as it currently reads. So, Mr. Speaker, in terms of being clear and specific, my humble opinion is that this motion doesn't meet the test. In terms of legality, even asking a president to suspend the implementation of LI, I think 2216, is a matter that, in my humble view, flies in the face of legality. In terms of not being discriminatory, this motion as it stands currently discriminates against students of private tertiary institutions. And in terms of best practice, Mr. Speaker, as I've mentioned earlier, things like fiscal impact analysis, etc., are not included as it stands. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, it is a good thing that we all acknowledge now, despite the earlier comments, that it was populist, it was a cheap approach. It's a good thing that we all acknowledge now that reliefs for Ghanaians should be done at a time like this. And I encourage my colleague to keep on this path. I'm happy we're on this path. But, Mr. Speaker, this motion as it stands, to the extent that it appears to say, because we have voted for monies for COVID-19, it should be able to cover all of these things. One, we know those monies were for specific purposes. And B, Mr. Speaker, because in my mind, these basic pillars that must be met as a test are not met, myself and I believe a good number of my colleagues will not be able to support this motion as it currently stands. I thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member for Norton, Samuel Okujeto-Ablakwa.
Most grateful, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak to this motion. This motion, Mr. Speaker, fundamentally is about what this House, as members of Parliament, will do to alleviate the plight of students across all tertiary institutions as the 2020-2021 academic year commences, in the face of the pandemic that continues to ravage the world. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, COVID-19 has infected more than 100 million people on the globe. More than 2.1 million people have died. In Ghana, we know that there have been over 300 deaths and counting. there is talk of a second wave, which we have not been exempted from. 2 new strains of the virus have been detected, one from the United Kingdom and one from South Africa. The experts tell us that these variants are more deadly, and the COVID-19 situation is totally disrupting economies, is creating untold hardship. It has led to extreme poverty. Economies are collapsing, and our economy is not excluded. Indeed, this economy is in recession. As we speak, many have lost jobs, many workers have been laid off, and there is considerable difficulty. And that is why governments across the globe have been intervening to mitigate and to cushion their citizens. I do know, Mr. Speaker, that all of us have been committed one way or the other in helping to alleviate the plight of our constituents, even at the constituency level. I am shell-shocked that my colleague, the Honorable Kojo Nkrumah, sought to create the impression that the interventions that His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, as leader of this country, made in his first term was not supported by this side of the House. That cannot be a statement of fact. Indeed, all the coronavirus relief interventions that came to this House received the full support of this House. The record will bear me out. This side of the House supported every single intervention, all the allocations. His Excellency, the former president, which he sought to indict, His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama, did not only publicly support social interventions, he himself was at the forefront, at the personal level, in making donations, personal protective equipment, to the Ridge Hospital, to the Kolebo Teaching Hospital, to the whole hospital, the Volta Regional Hospital, virtually all the regional hospitals in this country. So how can somebody who was at the forefront of making social interventions, he does not manage our taxes, he has not been given public funds to manage, and yet he managed to dig deep and raise personal resources to help alleviate the plight of Ghanaians? How can this same person be accused today by the caretaker information minister that President Mahama does not believe in social interventions or alleviating the plight of our people? The good people of this country know the track record of President Mahama and the NDC. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, some of us at the personal level in our constituencies, I have been inspired by the contributions that members of parliament have made in their constituencies. In my own constituency, I managed to raise resources to even pay private school teachers who have been home for several months without salaries. And I have seen other interventions by colleagues. So, as leaders, we know that a time like this demands of us to stand up and speak for the vulnerable, to stand up and creatively find ways of ensuring that our citizens who vote for us fundamentally to improve their lot, to ensure that their welfare is protected, we must not be seen or heard using technicalities, warped arguments, and outright falsehoods to, as it were, stifle their progress. Mr. Speaker, it is important to stress that fundamentally, education...
Honourable Member, please hold on. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that I am the first person on this particular motion to speak in opposition to the motion. My colleague on the other side talks about outright falsehoods and warped arguments. Mr. Speaker, I believe that if it is me he's referring to, that will not be parliamentary. I believe, as has been mentioned already, we are working in consensus. So if it is me that is describing as having put falsehoods before this House, it will be important to specify what falsehood I have put before this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member, you know what is acceptable language, you know? So kindly withdraw those words which are unparliamentary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I heard my honourable colleague say that we did not support President Akufo-Addo's freebies. We opposed it. And that's not the truth, if I should put it that way. That is not the truth. That is not accurate. So I really am at a loss, unless I didn't hear you clearly.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I believe my colleague did not hear me right. I quoted the former President John Dramani Mahama, who is not a member of this House, and his public comments in describing what the President was doing as freebies. My colleague on the other side says that the members of this House did not vote against the President's application for funds. I do not believe that putting the two together, he can describe my quotation of the former President as an outright falsehood. I don't believe so, Mr. Speaker. I think it is incorrect, and he should withdraw saying.
You have taken the former President totally out of context. I have put it to you that the former President did not only support the President's social interventions, he himself led his party to offer donations to hospitals, to orphanages, to people who were affected.
Honourable Member for Northern, the issue is, did he misquote the former President? If he did not, then it is not a falsehood. That's all I'm asking you to withdraw.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will comply with your decision in deference to you and with utmost respect. But the facts are known to everybody in this country that President Mahama did not only support social interventions, he led the way. There are very few opposition leaders who don't manage taxes, who did what President Mahama did in this country in the year 2020. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to progress. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Mr. Speaker, makes education a right. The United Nations admonishes all governments to ensure that whatever barriers, whatever limitations will get in the way of their nationals, they should do well to get those barriers out of the way. And that is why in Ghana, when we promulgated the 1992 Constitution, Article 25 of the 1992 Constitution virtually rehashed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and made education a right. And Mr. Speaker, since 1992, if you look at the Constitution, we are one of few countries that put in our Constitution FQ, free compulsory universal basic education, that it should be free. And successive governments must be commended for that effort. President Akufo-Addo must also be commended for building on that, what President Rawlings, President Mills, President Kufuor, before President Mills, President Mahama did by progressively free secondary education and introduced free SHS. All of that is in fulfillment to Article 25 of our Constitution. What is interesting is that Article 25 1C of our Constitution even makes higher education in Ghana progressively free. That as we build this economy, as we work hard to expand the national cake, a day should come that students, Ghanaian students at the tertiary level, should not be called upon to pay fees. That is a fantastic dream of the forebears of our constitution and our country. And so in all we do, we should, as a matter of principle and philosophically, have this understanding that even in good times, that is the philosophy of our country. Our raison d'etre is that we will get to a day when education at all levels, basic, second cycle, tertiary, higher education, will be free, even in good times. That is what Article 25(1)(c) of our Constitution says. So how much more in these difficult times, where more than 2 million people in the world have died? And as I speak to you, Mr. Speaker, countries are being very innovative. The Africa Development Bank has a report out where 33 African countries have been singled out for praise for giving out cash grants, including students, 33 African countries, as a way of alleviating their plight during this pandemic. The United States of America, Mr. Speaker, has passed the CARES Act, C-A-R-E-S, the CARES Act, where student loans, for the first time in many decades, have been suspended. The interests have been suspended. Students are being cushioned in the United States of America. In Canada, there is a special intervention that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has introduced to cushion students in Canada. Germany has done same. The United Kingdom has also given over £100 million to universities to alleviate the plight of students and lecturers. I have talked about the 33 African countries. Please listen to me, follow my argument. I started with 33 African countries. So, Mr. Speaker, I will appeal that those who want to contribute to the debate, when it gets to their turn, it's affecting my strain of thought, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, there is best practice globally in this period. We have seen what African countries are doing. We have seen what the countries that have just listed are doing to alleviate the plight of students. And it is interesting that during the 2020 campaign, Mr. Speaker, the two parties, the MPP and the NDC, acknowledged this grim reality. And if you look at the MPP manifesto, they had very impressive promises which look like what we are debating today. One, in the MPP manifesto, they said that students will no longer need guarantors because of the conditions that we face now. They also said that students will now get loans. They are proposing that when elected, in the second term of President Akufo-Addo, without prejudice to the Supreme Court case, students will be given loans, pre-entry loans, so that you don't need to pay your admission fees before you get money to get in. Now you have the votes, the elections are over.
Wind up. I've just sought advice that the contributors should have 10 minutes each. Because the first two started without this advice, each of you have already exceeded 15 minutes. So kindly have 2 more minutes to conclude.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the MPP manifesto acknowledges the times we are in and made some good, what I would call far-reaching and positive proposals. I recall the MDC manifesto as well talked about the chamber policy, which was even later revised, that all the free SHS graduates would not pay fees at all. So what What the Honorable Mahama Yariga is asking for are matters that the two main political parties brought to the fore during the campaign. The various standard bearers spoke to them, and students were in anticipation that because of these hard times caused by COVID, when the 2020 and 2021 academic year commences, whether it's NPP or NDC in power, we will all make do our promises and we will deliver on those promises. So what has changed? Is it the case that we don't want to keep faith with the electorate, with the Ghanaian people? So this argument of discrimination, let my brother Honorable Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah take note that free SHS does not cover private schools. So does it mean President Akufo-Addo is discriminating against students in the private schools? So you are shooting your own policies in the foot. Then they claim that we cannot support private institutions. We have been doing it. As Deputy Minister of Education in charge of tertiary education, I recall that in the allocation of vehicles, anytime we buy buses for schools, we include the private tertiary institutions. We do extend support to them. So we have been doing that. We sometimes extend even grants when we negotiate with the World Bank, and there are some grants available for faculty. We allow them to also apply. So there's a long-standing tradition where we extend support to private tertiary institutions. These things are done. So the Honorable Mahama Yariga must be commended for bringing this motion. Is competent as the Speaker has ruled, and this House should not be said by our constituents that we sat aloof, we ran away from our campaign promises, and when the time came for us to stand up for them and to seek their interests, we chickened out and engaged in bad faith. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member for Bosomtwe, Dr. Adichum Osei.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this motion. Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleague talked about what has changed. My honorable colleague, nothing has changed. We as a government don't even have our ministers in place, so nothing has changed. We have not begun the process of implementing our manifesto. And when the appropriate time comes, my brother, we will not chicken out. Whatever we promised, we will deliver with your support. Mr. Speaker, I know there are many people in this House who have supported education, supported tertiary education, have paid the fees of our students in our constituency, and as someone who recently paid the fees of 30 students to pursue engineering at UMatt, I'll be the last one to come up here and speak against this motion. It's interesting when colleagues stand up and say we need to support our children. But Mr. Speaker, at the first survey you will say, yeah, there's COVID-19. But Mr. Speaker, I have spoken with a number of vice chancellors who are telling me they don't know what is going on in this house. The vice chancellors are saying that on a scale of preference, this is not what they are going to ask us to do for them. So I hope my honorable colleague did a survey that established that there's an urgent need. Let me give an example, Mr. Speaker. A number of universities have opened, all of them. Students have registered, they are in place. If my honorable colleague came to the House to say that the students have not shown up in school, it's a different argument. I will give you the example of University of Professional Studies, Accra. In 2018-19, 67% of the students that they admitted registered. You know, in Ghana, because we don't have a common admission platform.
Hold on. Yes, honorable member for Ningo Pram.
Thank you very much, Right Honorable Speaker. This House is a house of records. Hearing the former Deputy Minister for Education, say that he's spoken to vice chancellors and they say what we're doing in this house is not what they need and that it is not on their priority list. Right Honorable Speaker, it will only be right that he lets us know which vice chancellor of which university said that to him for the records of this house.
You're out of order. Honorable, please continue.
Mr. Speaker, when you look at the number of students who have registered and paid at University of Professional Studies Accra, UPSA, is 70% of students who were offered admission have duly paid and they are in school. In 2018-19, only 67% did actually pay and went to school. In 2019-20, 63% paid out of those who admitted paid and went to school. In the midst of the pandemic, 70% have paid and they are in school. So when the motion talks about absorbing fees, are we absorbing the fees of those who have already paid? Students who already paid and they are in school and they are studying, and are we absorbing the school the fees of students who have already paid? This is a very interesting suggestion and a motion to make at this point when students have already registered and they have paid their fees, and we are talking about absorbing of the fees. I don't know whose fees we are absorbing. Mr. Speaker, we know that our students should be supported, and we must in fact salute.
Yes, the honorable member on his feet. What is it?
Thank you, Right Honorable Speaker. Right Honorable Speaker, the former minister kept mentioning percentages, 70% of students pay their fees, 30%, what have you. No justification, no evidence, no source. How does he want this August House to believe in whatever that he's saying? I think that the honorable former minister should provide some evidence to indicate that actually the percentages...
Honorable members, please, for those who want to intervene, please be guided by the standing orders. If the member has not said something offensive, something factually incorrect, please don't intervene. Respond in your contribution. Thank you very much. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are in a pandemic, yes. And I want to salute the parents of this country that in the midst of a pandemic, they have sent their children to school and they have paid for them to be in school. I want to salute the honorable colleagues in this side, both sides of the aisle, who has also supported their students to go to school. And I want to say that this motion have not made a case that students are on the streets, students are not in school, students are in school, they have registered, they have paid, they are studying, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, inasmuch as I support assistance to needy students, inasmuch as I support that we have to do our utmost to ensure that every student have an opportunity to attend tertiary education when they have satisfied all their requirements, inasmuch I know that tertiary education is one of the most critical factors for the transformation of a nation. Mr. Speaker, I know that if your gross tertiary enrollment ratio is not up to about 40 to 50%, the transformation of your country will elude you. So any attempt to support students should be commended. But Mr. Speaker, as I look at this motion and reflect on it, this motion is just going to cause confusion. Because when this motion gets to the desk of the president, and we are talking about absorbing of fees, and we are saying fees of who? Fees of first-year students, continuing students. Is the fees of those who have paid, or the fees of those who are saying we cannot pay? Mr. Speaker, based on this, I stand and I say that this motion should be rejected.
Honorable Haji Aladi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to contribute to the motion on the floor, and I support the motion. Mr. Speaker, listening to the arguments on the floor, I have asked myself several questions, including the very fact that the arguments against this motion go on to talk about discrimination, while the same persons who are making the argument and saying the motion is discriminatory are the same persons who are upholding and praising the fact that government have given free water, free electricity, free senior high, and what have you. Mr. Speaker, is it everyone in Ghana or every Ghanaian who has a child in senior high school? No. Secondly, you talk of paying or absorbing the cost of water. What percentage of Ghanaians have pipe-borne water for which they pay water bills? If this is not discriminatory enough, then I would be asking myself severally where we have put those Ghanaians who have actually voted for us and we are here, who are in the villages, do not have even potable drinking water from boreholes, not even recommended wells, are drinking from the same sources with animals, and yet we sit and agree and argue that once we have given free water to those in towns, some of, I will say some of, and that underlined, because even those in the urban areas, it's not all of us who have water running through our pipes. Mr. Speaker, we speak about free electricity, and we want to say we haven't been discriminatory in that respect, when we know very well that rural electrification is one of the issues that we are still battling and struggling to make sure most of our Ghanaians who need the support, who need our support, are still looking for. And yet, we uphold that better than the fact that if every Ghanaian is educated or is given an opportunity, who has the opportunity and the ability, if we give them that support, at the end of the day, all these supports that we might be talking about in this house today, they will be able to support families so that we wouldn't continue to have these problems. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about an issue that has come out because of the pandemic. With the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, it's not an issue of people have been able to pay. Let us ask ourselves, how did they get those monies? Haven't most of them borrowed? We are fully aware in this house that some of them even come back to us to tell us that we should support them to go and pay or offset those monies that they have borrowed. Let us be sincere with ourselves. The motion on the floor is not an issue of NDC or MPP. The issue on the floor is not about whether it is whose president has won or has not won. The issue on the floor is about our own persons, those that cannot, and those who do not have it. Mr. Speaker, the issue of discrimination also came when it was discussed, being mentioned here by my most respected colleague, and with all due respect, that we do not know what fees we should be paying for, because we are not able to tell who pays what. I believe that no matter how much the fee is, whether it is 1,000 Ghana cedis or 2,000 Ghana cedis, it is very relevant and important. And in supporting, we should look at it that even the free water that was being given, we all do not pay the same amounts. We pay different amounts when it comes to our water bills, our light bills, and what have you. Mr. Speaker, this issue has ruined a lot of families because parents are not able to pay these fees, and because most of these people who are going to school are adolescents, either early adolescents or late adolescents, Mr. Speaker, they simply do not believe and do not understand their parents. Parents have gone at loggerheads with each other on how they will be able to pay these monies. Mr. Speaker, the 70% that my colleague on the other side would have referred to as those who have paid for the academic year 2020-2021, Mr. Speaker, I can assure you it includes the monies that MPs would have supported some of these students to pay. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic is not a respecter of anybody. Whether you are what party, Mr. Speaker, the fact is that this has eaten to the very fabric of our economy in such a way that most people are not able to undertake their businesses anymore. We here are seated and we are talking about people who are finding it difficult to even go out there and sell. Even the woman who is selling okra, selling tomato, selling onion, is finding it difficult because she is not able to sell due to social distancing, due to travel problems. Yes, we would say what we want to say, but we should be preaching social distancing. We should be preaching social distancing. And all these issues come to play. Farmers are not able to travel as they want to travel because their products are ripe. They have to go to the market, and yet maybe the vehicle that has to carry the goods would carry the goods without the owner of the goods, and that person will have to go on a different truck and might not get that truck because the truck is full. And most of these our farmers, their goods are perishable. Mr. Speaker, I wish to plead with us here and to say we should, as earlier discussed, and as the maker of the motion stated, that there was consensus for him to have changed the statement from its original form to what it is. If there was consensus, Mr. Speaker, let us respect ourselves and know that what we are doing is for every Ghanaian. Mr. Speaker, I support the motion 100%, and I am for it. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Alexander Fenyo-Markin.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to add my voice to the motion on the floor. Mr. Speaker, let me state that having listened to my colleagues who have contributed so far from the minority side, it is clear to me that all submissions made by them were not seated within the terms of the motion as proposed, moved, and seconded by the two members on their side. Mr. Speaker, we are being led into an array of populism, unguided. And Mr. Speaker, the same argument as it being advanced is also talking about the state of our economy. So, Mr. Speaker, what is the mover of the motion requiring of us as a House to do? I may refer to his own motion. Mr. Speaker, this is what his motion says. At the risk of being repetitive, I shall quote in full, that this House resolves to request the President of the Republic of Ghana to take urgent steps to absorb fees of students of public tertiary institutions for the 2021 academic year and to extend support to accredited private universities as part of national COVID-19 alleviation measures being implemented by the government of Ghana. Mr. Speaker, with the greatest respect, the motion itself in its form and in substance is defective. Why the differential use of language? Why use a language absorb that of public tertiary students, and then the same motion talks about extend support to private universities? Mr. Speaker, clarity and certainty are key. If we are inviting Mr. President and his government to do a certain act, we ourselves must be clear exactly what we want the government to do. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that this motion as moved is not clear, is not certain. We are not sure of the intent of Honorable Mahama Ayariga. And Mr. Speaker, listening to my respected colleague Ablakwa, he argued, and in support, these were his words. As a result of COVID-19, economies are being disrupted, economies are collapsing. These are his words. Then he refers again to Article 25, 1C. Mr. Speaker, the Article 25, 1C, which he quoted to support his argument, says, higher education shall be made equally accessible to all on the basis of capacity, vary by every appropriate means, and in particular progressive introduction of free education. So, Mr. Speaker, the interlocking relationship here, in one breath, his argument is that economies are failing, and that does not exclude Ghana. He says that COVID is disrupting economies. That does not exclude Ghana. Then, the constitutional provision he relied on to advance his case also talks about capacity. So, Mr. Speaker, in the wake of COVID, is it his case that though we are having disrupting economy, though our economy is failing, we still have capacity to carry out the mandate as being imposed on us by our respected colleague Ayariga? Mr. Speaker, the inconsistency is very apparent. It's so clear that you cannot approbate and reprobate. You cannot eat your cake and have it. If you want to invite us to follow you on a particular path, it is important to be consistent, clear in what you want us to do. The mover of the motion himself says that he expects government to sit together with the implementers of its educational policy. Mr. Speaker, if indeed this is what Honorable Ayariga wants us to do, then it is important to advert his mind to Order 72. Mr. Speaker, this is what Order 72 says. By the indulgence of the House and leave of Mr. Speaker, a member at any time appointed for statement under Order 53, explain a matter of personal nature, make a statement on a matter of urgent public importance. Any statement other than personal statement may be commented upon by other members for a limited duration of time, not exceeding an hour. Mr. Speaker, I will end there and make this point, that if indeed the intent of my colleague is to bring to the attention of this House this matter as urgent and as important as he deems it, which I agree with him, he should come by way of statement. This is the appropriate channel to advance this cause. Then we would be engaging. What he is doing, Mr. Speaker, is exactly what Mr. Speaker admonished us not to do. Carrying out an obstructionist agenda, trying to ambush government, because the appropriate route is to come up with a statement. If you come out with a statement, we engage each other, because, Mr. Speaker, the explanatory submission by him talks about the fact that he is not restricting government. He is encouraging government to take the opportunity to sit with the implementers. These were his words. The implementers. And then he also talks about the fact that there's going to be a fiscal cost, a fiscal impact, which, Mr. Speaker, my colleague Kojo Oponkruma advanced that argument in extenso. He took time to explain to us the fiscal impact on our economy. Now, are you, Mr. Speaker, this is my question to the minority, are you ready to accept any imposition of tax to support this cause? Because if we all agree, as my colleague from Pusiga, whom I refer to as my mother, said, she said that businesses are collapsing. I agree. I recently went to a colleague's office, a lawyer, so respected, and she said, he told me, Alex, I used to have over 35 lawyers in this office. Today, all of them are sitting at home. I'm not getting referrals. As a lawyer, I know the impact. I used to do several cases. Now they are not coming. If you agree that the economy is failing, that businesses are failing, and you also say that government should absorb, you know that government...
Member, hold on. Yes, Honorable Deputy Leader. Deputy Chief Whip, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my Honorable Deputy Leader made a serious allusion to this side of the House by breaching the very rules that is giving the opportunity to speak, by imputing improper motives to the mover of this motion. Mr. Speaker, we have so many tools at our disposal. You can use statements, you can use motions. The Honorable Member for Boku Central have chosen to come by a motion. And Mr. Speaker, your good self have admitted it. Is he saying that you are supporting the member for Boku Central in implementing obstructionist agenda? Mr. Speaker, I think it's unfair, and he must withdraw and apologize not only to the Honorable Member for Boku Central, to your good self as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity.
Honorable Member, did you use those words, what was it? Obstructionist agenda. Did you use those words?
Mr. Speaker, if my colleague wants to quote those words as he put it, then he will be right in requiring of me to withdraw. But I use those words, and I would want to repeat for the benefit of his further hearing. I am saying that Mr. Speaker admonished us that as a House, we should not be seen to be carrying out an obstructionist agenda. And that, in my view, having listened to his explanatory argument in support of his motion, I 100% believe that the appropriate channel is Order 72. However, the approach he is adopting creates the impression that if this is carried out, then we may be moving on the route of an obstructionist agenda. That is not improper motive or something I'm imputing to him. No, that's not what I said.
The last part you just mentioned suggests that they are going on a route of an obstructionist agenda, and I direct that to withdraw.
Mr. Speaker, we are guided, and accordingly, to the extent that that impression is held, I accordingly take out that portion, and I thank him for bringing that to the fore, and I appreciate your ruling. Mr. Speaker, that notwithstanding, it is my considered view that an invitation such as we find may lead to the imposition of taxation if government is supposed to embrace what is being required of it to do. Because, Mr. Speaker, ab initio, government has announced that because of some of these challenges, even application for student loan will no more require a guarantor. That you don't need a guarantor to support your application. That in itself is some relief. Honorable member for Pusiga had even talked about the burden on them. But, Mr. Speaker, we know that MBSSI has been giving out cash grants to support businesses and to help parents to keep on with their businesses so that they can pay. Mr. Speaker, again, government has announced scholarship that those who cannot afford, please go and apply for scholarship. Mr. Speaker, clearly, for all these interventions that have already been announced, this motion becomes odious. We need not proceed further with it, but rather engage government. In any event, Mr. Speaker, the government is at its formative days. Ministers are yet to be approved by this government. As Honorable Dr. Edutum said, government policy per its blueprint in the manifesto is yet to be rolled out. Must we, Mr. Speaker, must we as a house stampede government at this point? I think in the spirit of consensus building, which we used to initiate our very 8th parliament, we should not be seen to be passing a resolution, uncertain resolution, unclear resolution. Is it only for the optics? Is it for the media? Is it to create a certain impression about us? No. We should be seen to be acting in good faith in a manner that government will see that indeed this is the House's position. But, Mr. Speaker, the form and substance as we find would not arrive at that destination. And I think that in view of the uncertainties, in view of the lack of clarity, in view of the submissions made by supporters of this motion, specifically Honorable Ablakwa, who argues with some force that we have our economy failing, we have our economy collapsing, we have businesses collapsing. We know also as a fact that GRA is not meeting its targets because businesses are failing, revenues are not coming in. We know how it is becoming difficult for common fund releases to go. It's driven by a populist Mr. Speaker, a populist breath. This motion
your term is up.
Does not seek to achieve its own purpose and say must be rejected until the right thing is done for government to consider. I thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Rashid Pelpo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this very
very innovative idea of presenting a policy initiative from Parliament to government. Mr. Speaker, I've been in this House for a while. This motion is one of a few that I have ever seen being presented from this House by a member on a public matter of importance to the government. Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy you admitted the motion. I'm very happy that at the onset of this motion, members of this House, especially our friends from the other side, decided to address the motion at a point because they said they needed to streamline it, to make it, put it in a better position to capture a larger majority of Ghanaians, because they thought about the fact that it's discriminatory if it did not include the private institutions. They talked about the need for us to specify what fees it was. The Speaker, they contributed in shaping up the present motion as it is. Many of us thought that in that contribution, or in those contributions, they were mainly gerrymandering, mainly wasting time, so that at the end of it, the former Deputy Minister of Education will now come and say that students have already paid their fees, so why are you bringing these fees here? Mr. Speaker, this is a motion that we all support from this side. Mr. Speaker, it is a motion that will make Ghanaians happy, and I think that all students listening to us who have knocked doors, who have gone borrowing, who have gone to their MPs will be happy that this motion is being debated, and will be happy that we support this motion and allow the President to take steps, Mr. Speaker, to take steps to make sure that their fees are absorbed. Mr. Speaker, I listened to a lot of red herring arguments, starting from the former Minister for Information. Mr. Speaker, he made mention of the fact that the motion contradicts.
Mr. Speaker.
The motion contradicts Order 112 of our standing orders. Mr. Speaker, nothing is further than the truth than that. Order 112 of the Constitution is talking about bills, of our standing orders. It's talking about bills, imposing bills, making amendments that will impose tax or cost to the consolidated fund. It is not talking about a motion that is urging government to take steps. The taking steps is going to be for government to take its time and do the appropriate thing that will result into the effect of the desire of the motion. Mr. Speaker, my majority group have not approached this matter in good faith. Because if they approach it in good faith, they would not have, from the position of the majority, the minister former minister of information, say they would not be able to support it because they contributed in making the motion appear in the present situation it is now. Mr. Speaker, there is something that Honorable Deputy Majority Leader on and has brought it to the floor today. I'm very happy, Mr. Speaker. Today he brought it up. There was a request for a withdrawal, and then you upheld it and made him to withdraw. He said it publicly in the media that we are obstructing government business by our opposition to whatever is brought on the floor of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, that is not called obstruction. That is called opposition. We don't obstruct government business on behalf of the people, and we make sure that we don't allow the majority side or the majority group to impose a will.
Hold on. Yes, Deputy Leader.
Mr. Speaker, with respect, I write on a point of order. And on this writing, I have two issues. One, there hasn't been a reference to Order 112, as it's been alluded to. The reference was made to Constitutional Provision 108. Mr. Speaker, second, my respected colleague is also saying, misquoting me, that I have used certain expressions in the media. With greatest respect to him, I have not. I have said that we must not be giving such an impression. Don't say, if you want to get it right for the records of the Hansard, please pick what I said and quote verbatim. Then I would have no problem. With all due respect. Mr. Speaker, then he said, we are arguing in bad faith. Mr. Speaker, what is his contention under bad faith? What is it that we have said? That, Mr. Speaker, was it not the same issue that Honorable Ahmed raised, that one is imputing improper motive? Who is arguing in bad faith? What is red herring? Mr. Speaker, we are contending that same must be withdrawn. He should argue and not make improper, impute improper motives, to this other side. Mr. Speaker, he should withdraw.
Honourable members, I declined to recognize Honourable Opon Nkrumah because I thought he was going to raise a red herring. I looked up the meaning of red herring. I don't think it is offensive, so I rule out red herring. But the issue about citing the issue of citing or misquoting the article cited, I'll give you the opportunity to correct yourself, Honourable, and continue.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, yes, Article 108 of the Constitution is the same article lifted in our standing orders, and it's talking about imposing tax, imposing cost on the consolidated fund by way of introducing a bill or amending a bill. Nobody has talked about a motion. It doesn't talk about a motion that is urging the president to take steps. The Speaker, that argument is done. It's not reflecting the motion as moved by Honourable Ayaga. And so, Mr. Speaker,
Honourable member, let's be clear.
Yes.
I'll quote the Constitution so that you'll be given the opportunity again. Parliament shall not, unless the bill is introduced or the motion is introduced by or on behalf of the President, and the rest continues. So the reference to a motion is appropriate. The Honourable member did not misquote anything.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I relied on our standing orders. Honourable Ayaga would like to, I would like to yield briefly to him to respond to it.
Honourable member, you have the floor. Please continue.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, our standing orders, as I said, does not refer to a motion, but the Constitution may have referred to a motion, but this is not imposing tax. It is not imposing tax. It is not imposing cost. It's appealing to the president. The president still has a right to say no, because this is not a law. So, Mr. Speaker, that argument cannot be refusing to accept this motion. This motion is good. Mr. Speaker, we are in difficult times. Mr. Speaker, COVID has caused a lot of havoc. Mr. Speaker, it has collapsed businesses as they have agreed. Mr. Speaker, it has made parents have difficulties in paying school fees, and therefore calls on us to show responsibility, to demonstrate that we love our kids. Mr. Speaker, they have already made it a policy. The policy is to give free money to people. People during the campaign were receiving free monies on my mobile numbers on their mobile numbers. Mr. Speaker, through mobile money, they were transferring money to people because they said they wanted to alleviate the suffering of people. We are simply saying that extend it to the students. The students are also suffering. Mr. Speaker, if today, because of students, they are calling that obstruction.
Yes, Honorable Chair.
Right, Honorable Speaker, my colleague on my right has made a very serious statement that during the electioneering campaign, they were transferring monies on phones. That's a wild allegation to make. Who was transferring what? Was it from the exchequer? Who was doing that? If he cannot substantiate it, this wild allegation should be withdrawn. This is not a forum for wild allegations. This is a very serious forum. How would you verify the transfer of money? For what purpose? To who? Is it from the exchequer? With the greatest of respect, we shouldn't make this allegation part of the hazard. If you cannot substantiate who was transferring money from who to who and the source of the money, we should just expand it from the record. It's too embarrassing for himself and his nation. It should substantiate it or resolve. Right, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Member, it is true that the NBSSI disbursed its loan application for small businesses through mobile money system. So it is a fact, it's not a wild allegation. It's official. Those who applied and those who qualified were given the money. It's a loan through their mobile system. So it's a fact.
With your indulgence, he was mentioning electioneering campaign.
No.
But if it's a national exercise and monies were to be transferred, that distinction should be clear. Nobody was using money to try to induce people to vote. That was what he was trying to impute. And right now, Speaker, the distinction is clear. If there is a national exercise and the beneficiary should receive the money via mobile transfer, that is a different kettle of fish. But to say
thank you, Honorable,
yes,
Honorable Member, thank you. I did not hear him say it for election. I would have ruled him out. If he said so, it is false. And if it is said so, that part should be expunged from the record. Honorable Member, please conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy you did. The honorable minister, the honorable former minister, has been kept